The Horse Race is brought to you by Benchmark Strategies, Boston's leading public affairs and public relations consulting firm. To learn more, connect with Benchmark on LinkedIn at Benchmark Strategies or visit benchmark-strategies.com. Welcome back to The Horse Race, your weekly look at politics, policy, and elections in Massachusetts. I'm Steve Koczela, president of the MassINC polling group, and it is Thursday, February 5th. Today, we're talking about Haitian residents across the nation and here in Massachusetts, and why they're facing new questions about their legal status. All right, Jen, it is February, according to the little calendar thingy in the bottom right of my screen. I can't tell because here in Kenya, it's 82 degrees outside, as it always is, every single day. But from what I can tell, based on the misery that I see on social media, it's pretty cold there. Do I have that more or less correct?
By social media, you just mean by social media, you just mean me screaming at you in our kind of the horse race chat. I mean, look. My disclosure here, as our listeners know, is I was in a ski town in Park City with very little snow, dodging multiple storms. I got back to Boston this past Sunday, and this is going to be incredible podcast content. I was immediately greeted by two very, very snowy Dorchester sites that, look, our lovely producer is more than welcome to share on social media because neither of them tell you where I live. There is a crossing in Dorchester that was the first thing I saw when I came back. And there's this huge pile of snow and a sign that has clearly just gone through it that just says ends. That was the first thing I saw when I got back to Boston.
It's very doomish. Like, it doesn't actually say, we have the picture here, and it doesn't say what ends. It's just this sign sticking up out of one of those giant piles of snow that says ends. It's one of those piles where you're like walking down the sidewalk and then there's like an 11-foot pile of snow and you have to walk out in the street, across the street, and continue on after the pile that's also there on the other corner. So classic stuff.
It's very apocalyptic, and I was comforted, a little bit later when I finally ended up making it to a lovely row of three-deckers, yes, covered in snow, but with a lovely Dorchester sunset behind it. So those were my two experiences, was just, I guess it is ending, and then what could be ending when there are three-deckers and a sunset?
Yeah, I also saw the annual arguing over space savers erupting on Blue Sky and Facebook, which is always a good time. That's been going on at least since I got to Boston, and with really no progress in the argument, no new arguments, just kind of the same, everybody trashing those on the other side once a year.
That's right. I still have not seen a space saver as good as in 2015 when someone near me put out a vintage armoire outside their beautiful Dorchester Victorian home. And I just honestly think people gotta get back to that mentality. That's where I stand right now.
Like, put out something nice. You're saying none of this just like an old toilet or like a broken lawn chair. Like, you should put out your classy stuff.
Yeah, don't traumatize your neighbors. Destroy your vintage furniture.
All right. Well, that would be a good Twitter survey back in the days of Twitter that we could have done, like, what is the best kind of space saver? But unfortunately, Twitter doesn't exist anymore. We only have the hellscape that is X. So I guess we can't do that. We'll just have to imagine. We do have important things to talk about, Jen. We always have important things to talk about. What do we have this week?
That's right. We're going to spend the episode this week talking with our very good friend of the pod, Sarah Betancourt at GBH, about, frankly, just an enormous pile of disagreement, confusion, lawsuits all around immigration status. In this case, starting with what's been happening around temporary protected status for Haitians, not just in Massachusetts, though many of them are here, but also across the nation, and why that's been in flux over the past year or so. So let's get into that, shall we?
Giddy up.
Conversation around immigration has been very focused lately on the behavior of ICE, for obvious reasons. But this week we're following up on a different storyline. What's going on with temporary protected status? And to talk about it, we are joined by friend of the pod, GBH immigration reporter Sarah Betancourt. Sarah, welcome back. Your beat has not been a calm one lately.
No, it has not. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be back on the horse race. It's been a minute, but there's a lot to talk about.
I was going back, and I think one of the last times we had you on was actually to talk about what was going on with T.P.S. So to kind of give folks a primer, there have been 1.5 million storylines since then. If they are not familiar with T.P.S. and how it affects Haitians nationally and in Boston and other groups, why don't you give us a quick primer on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So TPS in general has existed since, it's called temporary protected status, since 1990. Back in 2010, the federal government designated the country of Haiti for temporary protected status because they had just undergone a pretty devastating earthquake. And subsequently, Haiti has dealt with a lot of post-colonial issues around economy, around politics, around violence. Like there is no stable government, no stable economy, no stable education system. So people who get temporary protected status, they have to be in the United States by a certain date. They have to not have committed any crimes. There's extensive background checks. And the status basically protects you temporarily for 18 months from fear of deportation. Unless you commit a crime, you can't really be deported. And also it gives you a valid work permit. So that's usually the biggest thing for people. And you can apply for renewal. And the U.S. federal government under Obama, under Biden, extended TPS because of the situation in Haiti not really changing. But this administration, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, decided to, on X and then sort of more officially later last year, decided to stop the status from, she wanted to end it early. There was like an end date. She wanted to end it early. That got litigated. So they finally settled on this February 3rd end date. And that was in the courts as a date that, advocates, Haitians themselves were very terrified of because that's the day you are not in the country legally anymore.
So in the title itself, it says it's supposed to be temporary. So because it was an important part of the actual legal proceeding, how is the end date of temporary supposed to be determined?
That's a very complicated question. Usually the federal government, in a nutshell, the government issues a designation for a country, and then they issue a very specific date. People apply at different times, so everyone sort of has their termination date, but the termination date for the entire group as a country could be a specific date. That was litigated, and then the Federal Register was posted back in November, and February 3rd was chosen. Now, the real issue here is the fact that the federal government, specifically the Department of State, has considered Haiti a level 4 travel advisory country, which means it is pretty dangerous to go there. There were even issues last year where airspace was shut down because gangs had overrun the Port-au-Prince airport. And so the issue here is that the federal government is saying it's unsafe for Americans to go there, but we're going to pretend those serious, dangerous conditions don't exist so that we can say that Haiti can no longer be designated for temporary protected status. And that's where Judge Anna Reyes, one of the many judges who's litigated this issue, and she was the most important most recently, in oral arguments in January, she was just like, well, you have these two opposing viewpoints within the same U.S. government. It's unsafe to go, but there's no issue, so it's safe for them to go back. So it raised a lot of questions, and we got a very, very 11th hour decision from her staying the ban and allowing the plaintiff's renewed motion to stay the government's termination pending further judicial review.
So to kind of orient folks, as the federal government was trying to roll back this program or halt this program, it was playing out through the court process here. So let's kind of go back to your reporting during the interim for a moment. What were people worried about? What were they kind of trying to do on sort of a day-to-day basis as their sort of future status in the country was in this uncertain limbo. It still, of course, could be thrown back into that. But during that period before Judge Reyes ruled, where were they?
I mean, here in Massachusetts, it's a huge issue because we have the third largest Haitian diaspora outside of Florida, and I believe the second state is New York. Massive amount of Haitians here. A lot of Haitians who've been here since Duvalier back in the 80s, the dictator back then, when there was political post-colonial upheaval back then even. So these are people who eventually applied for this temporary status because it was unsafe to go back to Haiti. And a lot of them have bought houses, owned businesses, like they've had kids who've had kids. So they've been here for a long time. And there's some migrants who've been here in the past 3 or 4 years in the most recent wave that made media coverage in the past few years. Everybody was terrified. I mean, when I published the story about the preliminary injunction, what was it, a day and a half ago, 11 o'clock at night, there was a post online about someone who took the story and went to a retailer next to him and showed the story to a Haitian who was working there, I think a stalker. And he actually saved it and was showing it to his roommates because he was not planning to go to work the next day because he had no work permit after that, if the injunction hadn't come, which meant he could have been deportable. And honestly, it's been so hard to find sources in the Haitian community who are willing to talk, even anonymously. I mean, I always know their full names, but even anonymously, because they think what happened in Minneapolis is going to happen here.
And I mean, I think one thing that we should also establish here, because you're talking about, how long many of these Haitians have been in the States, they're very integrated into communities. There's one of the subjects that had the potential to be hugely implicated by ending T.P.S. is many of them work as home health aides. That so many industries would be impacted here. In a nutshell, what was the stated reason from the Trump administration to roll this back? Because they've tried it twice now. Under both administrations, they've looked to adjust temporary protected status for Haitians. Why?
So the way it was put by Secretary Christine Noem last year in multiple X, formerly known as Twitter, posts was, she'd met with the president. I'm literally looking at her post right now. And it's interesting because sometimes the Department of Homeland Security Secretary conflates multiple immigration statuses and different policy initiatives that they're putting forth. So she said she'd recommended a full travel ban to, quote, on every damn country that's been flooding our nation with killers, leeches, and entitlement junkies. And later there was a tie to T.P.S. from that statement. So the mentality has been like people with T.P.S., the federal government has said, are more likely to be on public benefits, even though we haven't really been provided with that proof, and people with temporary statuses often do not have access to federal benefits that I guess some people would consider welfare, because they do not fall into the realm of people who qualify for that. So the idea has been like, Haiti's safe to go back to. We're not going to designate the country as unsafe anymore. We have the right to do that. The Department of Homeland Security has jurisdiction, and that's what we're going to do.
So the basic story sounds honestly pretty familiar at this point, which more or less is Trump tries to do something terrible to some group of non-white residents, and a judge intervenes to stop it, at least temporarily. In this case, that was Judge Reyes. Her opinion has kind of been bouncing around on social quite a bit, actually. So tell us a bit about what it said.
Yeah, absolutely. So Judge Reyes, out of the federal court in D.C., granted the plaintiffs, who were 5 Haitians, renewed motion to stay the government's termination pending judicial review. We don't know how long that judicial review is going to take. And just to get the other side on the record here, the government did tell me that they intend to appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. They might have skipped a couple courts there, one court, the circuit court, but that's what they said. So Reyes did something interesting. She compared Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, to the words of George Washington. And she said something like, America is open to receive not only the opulent and respected stranger, but the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions, which was from a 1783 letter from Washington of he was commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And then she said that more than 200 years later, so this was 1990, Congress reaffirmed his vision by creating T.P.S. for foreign nationals coming from disaster-stricken countries, people who couldn't go back. Then she said Noem has a different take, and she included that social media post I was talking about the killers, leeches, and entitlement junkies. Then she went on to say, like, Noem had preordained her termination decision, and she did so because of hostility to non-white immigrants. And she said it's substantially likely that she did that because of this hostility that Noem has toward non-white immigrants. And then she went on to say what I said earlier, which is DHS does not have unbounded discretion, because the government wanted this case dismissed, and she denied that. They said, she didn't have the jurisdiction to cover it. This was all in the purview of DHS. So Reyes said, no, that's not true. So we'll see what the circuit courts say once this is appealed.
And so talking to the folks who are kind of both bringing the suit and also impacted by the suit and however it ends up kind of playing out, are they gearing up for this to just be overturned, essentially? I think to kind of put a fine point on what Steve was talking about before is we've sort of seen a pattern over time where, there might be a lower court judge, often in an area like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, D.C., California, who will put an administration decision on hold. And then as soon as it gets up to either appeals, circuit, federal, depending on which track it's going up, you very often then see those courts swap the other way the more full of Trump appointees they are, if we're kind of talking frankly about that. So is there an expectation that this will just end up kind of going back the other way again, or a worry about that?
It's deeply unclear. And I mean, any litigation is like that. Anything can flip-flop from court to court as you go up higher and higher up the food chain. But for people who were like, I'm going to lose my status on Tuesday, ICE just delivered a bunch of vehicles to the Burlington ICE processing facility. Look what they did in Minneapolis. I won't have a work permit, so technically I will be here illegally. That was a very, even extended by a month is a big deal. And it's not technically an extension. It's a ban on something going into place. But even that is helpful to people so they can figure out what to do next. Like, some people can apply for an adjustment of status by switching to another immigration status, which is not the easiest thing to do. Some might try to apply for asylum. There's some issues with that because of other Trump policies that have gone into place. But it was a very immediate worry, and that immediate worry got pushed. Even if it's a Band-Aid, they consider it a win, because they can still put bread on the table.
And let's look at a couple of the stories, because you illustrated this beautifully on the story on GBH News, which everybody should go read. We'll drop the link in the show notes. But Sarah, I wonder if you'd tell the story of a couple of the people that you actually interviewed for the story and kind of how this is affecting them.
Yeah, so I think you're probably talking about the thousands of Massachusetts Haitians facing the end of temporary protected status in February. And we had done a little number crunching, so to say, and figuring out which sources were accurate. And there's a lot of Haitians in Massachusetts, anywhere from 70 to 90,000. But about at least a quarter of those, maybe 20% to a quarter, have temporary protected status. And so they're very impacted. And it took a lot to be able to get people to trust me enough to talk to me. But there was one instance of a woman who lives in the Worcester area. She was really dreading February 3rd. She's a single mother of 3 U.S. citizen children. One is a college student. The other are teenagers. She works at a daycare. And she was terrified. She was terrified about going to work on Wednesday. because she would no longer have a work permit to work at the daycare. She's also a single mom, so she can't rely on like a U.S. citizen husband or someone with a green card to keep being employed. Massachusetts is expensive, so she was very, very nervous. And she was nervous about that immediate thing of like not being able to afford their apartment, etc. She came here over 20 years ago due to gang violence in her town near the capital of Haiti. Yeah, she was terrified. And then there was also another young woman who's 19. She's a UMass Boston student, and she is not going to school right now. And I asked her, like, why? Like, is there something going on? And she's like, I'm terrified to go to UMass Boston right now because there's been a lot of ICE arrests in the area. She had been familiar with some people who'd been detained in her social circle. And yeah, she was just hunkering down at home, watching Netflix, waiting for this to play out. And she's 19, not going to school. She finished her seasonal job in January, and everyone in her family had T.P.S. Like her mom, siblings, aunt, I think, was all living together under one roof. So it was a very real moment where something could very drastically change. And she also consumes a lot of media, so she's read about what's going on in Texas and detention centers, and she was like, I don't want to go to one. I don't want to die there. And she shared some of the media coverage she'd been reading. So it's pretty alarming.
And one other thing, of course, that comes to mind is since Massachusetts is one of the states with the largest Haitian diasporas in the country here, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is co-chair of the House Haiti Caucus. So what's this looked like on the congressional level, given, of course, as the caveat with all these things, they are not the party currently in power. So what has the Massachusetts delegation been pushing for?
So Pressley in December filed a bill that would require DHS to designate Haiti until spring of 2029. And she cited the economic and humanitarian reasons in doing that. She was looking for co-sponsors. There's been a lot of phone banks around that. I know she had an in-district hearing about a week and a half ago about the issue where industry leaders spoke. And I believe they were trying to force a vote about that, but I haven't really followed up necessarily on the congressional bill just because, like you said, politically it might be hard to pass or get very far along, but she's definitely doing her part in her role for that, and people are talking about it a lot. But yeah, it sort of remains to be seen what happens next in the higher courts.
And if we could also, I think, because we've alluded to it several times, one of the contexts around why Haitians under T.P.S. right now are so alarmed by the loss of this status is because we are in a moment of great sort of public uproar over the way that immigration officials have been behaving across the country in Texas, in Los Angeles, in Minneapolis. So you also have been covering, speaking of the courts beats and immigration here, changes around or whistleblowing around the behavior of ICE agents and where they can basically conduct immigration action. So why don't you give us an update on where we are on the ICE side of this equation right now?
Yeah, so whistleblowers from the agency recently revealed that there's a policy that exists from last spring, early summer, from Acting Director of ICE, Todd Lyons, advising agents that they can use force to enter private homes without a judicial warrant. And that's pretty key. So Lyons wrote that DHS could use administrative warrants to enter people's homes. And historically, officers could only go into people's homes with a judicial warrant. And then all these groups have done know your rights trainings saying that, you know, if ICE knocks on your door, you ask for a warrant signed by a judge. And administrative warrants are really different from that. So people are really afraid because administrative warrants are just pretty much pieces of paper signed by any supervising ICE official. Like, it's not someone who's actually a judge or within the judicial system. It's just an employee. So it does raise a lot of constitutional questions around the Fourth Amendment. And that is what Brazilian Workers Center and the Greater Boston Latino Network said in their federal lawsuit filed by Lawyers for Civil Rights. I think that was, January 30th. And they're asking that memo, that internal memo, be halted. And people were afraid because you had a status expiring this Tuesday where 350,000 immigrants nationally would suddenly become people without papers, making them deportable. So yeah, there was urgency.
Okay, Sarah, and because we're a Massachusetts podcast, in closing, I have to ask, what is the state of Massachusetts doing? What can they do, and what are they doing about this at this point?
So I would rely on our great political reporters, Katie Lannon and Adam Riley, to talk about hyper-specific bills and legislation. But I can tell you from a story Katie Lannon and I co-reported last week that the governor filed legislation last Thursday that would limit places where ICE agents can operate, including at courthouses. She proposed legislation that would ban warrantless civil arrest by ICE agents at Massachusetts courthouses, another issue we've covered pretty extensively. So Healey's bill would also make it unlawful for another state to send its National Guard to Massachusetts without the governor's permission, and set up a legal process for parents to pre-arrange guardianship for their kids in case they're detained. And she also proposed an executive order. So the state Senate President, Karen Spilka, said she would do everything in her power to pass Healey's proposal and add additional protections to the law. We're sort of waiting to see where it's at. That's sort of where things stand from Beacon Hill.
Yeah, the note, of course, that we always have to make is that, a single chamber can't really do anything on their own. The House is sort of a question mark in this one in terms of what their potential legislation would look like. Are they going to get on board with the governor and the Senate's proposal? And kind of beyond that, though, one thing that was very interesting to me in the announcements since last week is that even the announcements themselves sort of run into that huge blurry area between what the federal government can do with its vast immigration enforcement powers and what a state can do kind of on its own land, basically. And so the question that I've been getting a lot from people is, so basically the federal government rolled back this policy that said you can't conduct immigration enforcement arrests or detentions in kind of sensitive areas. So that included churches, courthouses, hospitals, that sort of thing. And so the state trying to step in and reassert that those areas are sensitive and not appropriate for immigration enforcement can basically mean, well, what happens if the federal government says we don't respect that policy? What can the state do? And so my sense of this is that is still kind of a huge open question. It will probably end up being tested through the courts. And like everything else, we will see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that policy was put forward last winter, I think, and it played itself out. I mean, we did a story last February about a local bodega where the owner and some of the employees had gone through Know Your Rights trainings in their own private lives. And I showed up and talked to a young woman who was just literally cutting boxes and asked her, "Are you an American citizen?" And she knew her rights. But then they went beyond that, front area where people just walk into a private business and they try to open locked doors. And you get that same sense of private space in courthouses. There's the lobbies where people are being detained. But can they go into the courtrooms? How is staff supposed to work? So there's a lot of questions. And I think you're right. All of this is going to be litigated.
All right, Sarah Betancourt, immigration reporter for GBH News and longtime friend of this here podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve and Jen.
I'm Zainab Asma-Doyle, Research Director at the MassINC Polling Group. The MassINC Polling Group serves the region's leading foundations, political groups, government entities, and businesses. Our surveys and focus groups bring high-quality data to the toughest questions facing society today. Learn more at massincpolling.com.
brings us to our final segment, Victimizing Me Personally, brought to you by our Groundhog Day department here at the horse race. Steve, that's a flamingo. I'm looking at a flamingo. That's not a groundhog.
It is a flamingo, but it shares an unexpected characteristic with a groundhog, which is that it is used in the town of Leominster to predict the weather. You are looking at a picture of Featherstone, the flamingo, according to the story from Fun 107, the South Coast's #1 hit music station, is a plastic pink lawn ornament with deep local roots that is actually used pretty much exactly the same as Punxsutawney Phil, the groundhog that predicts whether we're going to have 6 more winters or not, 6 more weeks of winter or not.
Don't say 6 more winters. That flamingo is so much more powerful than the groundhog.
I mean, I'm confident we're going to have 6 more winters, but maybe not 6 more weeks of this one, which is what Featherstone, the flamingo of Leominster, is supposed to predict.
I would like to note one significant difference between a groundhog and a flamingo lawn ornament, though, Steve, which is how can a plastic flamingo see anything?
Well, this part of the story is a bit confusing from a scientific standpoint, which is, it says, the rules are simple and delightfully unscientific, which is that they place Featherstone on the ground in, quote, a shaded spot. And then as the sun rises, you watch to see how the shadow falls. And if it leans toward the flamingo's face, you're going to get an early spring. And if it drifts behind it, you're going to have 6 more weeks of winter, which you might think, well, pretty much the sun is in the same spot every year at this time of year, so we can just put the flamingo in the right spot, and therefore we'll get a good forecast. They say delightfully unscientific, and I think that's all the explanation we're going to get.
This is delightful news for Leominster, and my hope is that they start, rigging Featherstone's placement in the future, and if not, maybe we just look at the way that the sun hits the giant N's sign in Dorchester above a dirty snowbank, and that's what we'll use.
That will become a tradition unless you're careful. I should also note there's actually a historical connection, which is that the pink flamingo as an idea, this plastic pink flamingo that's now ubiquitous, was first created in Leominster by Don Featherstone. So the flamingo and the place, the name of the flamingo, all have historical significance.
That's just wonderful. That's a great way to end this episode because that is all the time we have for today. I am Jennifer Smith signing off with Steve Koczela. Our production and theme music is done by Charlie Koczela. You can write to us at thehorseracepodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to give The Horse Race a review wherever you're hearing us now. Subscribe to Commonwealth Beacon's daily download and reach out to the MassINC polling group if you need polls or focus groups done. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.